This is the strongest swordsman alive. No, he's a human, not a rat. No, not a painter, I said a swordsman. Yep, that's right, it's Roronoa Zoro. In just a few months, Zoro will not only obtain a new power through his new perma black swords, but will also claim the title of the strongest swordsman to live. But to understand how Zoro does this, we have to go back to his birth and lineage. Because in One Piece, your DNA plays a big part in your strength. Just look at Luffy hailing from the monkey family of monsters to even Sanji literally having his DNA augmented from his king of a father. Zoro is no different, as 21 years ago, he was born in Shimotsuki village to Tera and Roronoa Arashi, a descendant of the legendary sword god Shimotsuki Ryuma. This is the same beast who till this day is hailed as the pinnacle of a samurai. He was so strong that he defeated a freaking dragon. This strong bloodline is pretty much nobility within Wano, but sadly it did not help Zoro's father, who died early in his life during a battle against pirates who were threatening his village. Not long after, his mother also died of an illness, but luckily his relative Shimotsuki Kyoshiro took him in as a pupil in his dojo. This is where Zoro would start his training, where at the age of 8, he became so strong that he could defeat adult swordsmen. However, he was still not the strongest student, as his cousin Kuina defeated him 2,000 times. But Zoro's lost streak showcases one of his strongest traits, his tenacity. The unbroken will to keep going no matter what. Even at the young age, Zoro was determined to achieve his dream to sail the seas and become the greatest swordsman in the world. This dream was inspired, of course, by his upbringing, where his father died fighting pirates due to being weak. In Zoro's mind, by becoming the strongest, death wouldn't be able to follow him anymore. So for his 2001st battle against Kuina, he put everything on the line. Zoro trained day in and day out, and one fateful day stumbled upon his great uncle Shimotsuki Kozaburo, or Kuina's grandpa. Kozaburo had come to this village along with Zoro's grandmother 48 years ago. He was renowned as the greatest swordsmith of his time, having created the Owazumono grade Enma and Wado Ichimonji. The old geezer taught Zoro a powerful word, a word which would be forgotten but remembered many years later, Tsunachi. Though this didn't interest Zoro one bit, it would subconsciously fire up his inner samurai. After seeing Zoro train outside of the dojo for a while, Kozaburo recognized his potential to become the greatest swordsman and decided to pass on 2 of his swords. Although not at the peak level of his masterpieces, with these swords, Kozaburo had parted wisdom, which was the foundation to Zoro's legacy. He told him, a sword has its own personality where its wielder has to master and bend it to their will. He would also tell Zoro that dangerous swords, which are called cursed, are in fact a sign of great quality and a badge of honor. But now, with these 2 real swords, Zoro felt ready and asked Kuina for their final battle. Zoro, using his 2 sword style, charged in with all the things he had learned from his fights. The protagonist music started up, but not for him. Zoro took this L pretty hard, as he cried in frustration seeing his dream to become the greatest swordsman wither away by this 12-year-old girl's hands. However, it's during this time where Zoro and Kuina start developing their relationship, as the latter confesses her own frustration of being a woman. She too had a dream of becoming the best, but as she ages, her strength won't be able to hold a candle to other male swordsmen. This enraged Zoro, who trained every day just to beat her, where it eventually, she had become his dream, and now this girl is saying oh, you're just gonna beat me anyways just because of the laws of nature, why even bother right now? That shit pissed this dude off. So Zoro tells her that the day he achieves his dream and wins will not be because he is a man, but through sheer skill. This leads the two to make a promise that either of them has to become the greatest swordsman ever, and then they will fight each other for the title. The next day, this promise would be tested for the very first time, as Kuina would have to face the strongest opponent in all of One Piece, Down D Stairs. This battle didn't last long, as Stairs-kun one-shotted her.
What? No, dude!
Upon learning of his best friend's fate, Zoro was completely shattered and disappointed at the fact that she would never never have a chance to fulfill their promise. So Zoro, in order to give Kuina a crack at the dream, asked for her sword Wado Ichimonji. He held 2 swords in his hands while clenching Wado in his mouth, giving birth to his 3-sword style. The sword being in his mouth represents him holding on to the promise with Kuina. You can cut off his arms to take his other swords, but to take Wado Ichimonji, you have to go for Zoro's head, meaning the promise is as important as his life. After years of training, Zoro finally learns of a man named Dracul Mihawk, who is the current greatest swordsman in the world. So he sets off to sea to find and challenge him. Now, anyone with a brain probably can guess what happened next. He got lost. Did nobody in his dojo tell him, yeah, Zoro, I know you want to go and find Mihawk, but you should probably find someone who can tell you how to walk on a straight line first, bro. What was this man Kyoshiro doing? Bro let his daughter die to stairs and didn't teach his student how to walk straight.
Trash.
Jokes aside though, Zoro being lost is actually a hint towards his final power, because Wado Ichimonji literally translates to straight line through the path of harmony. But to understand that, we gotta finish this story. So after getting lost, Zoro started bounty hunting to make some money on the side for food. I mean sake. He was actually so OP at getting bounties that he not only became well known in the East Blue as Pirate Hunter Zoro, but even in the Grand Line. Zoro's fame had grown to the point that even Crocodile, one of the warlords of the sea, recognized his strength and sent the former Mr. 7 to go and recruit him as a numbered agent for Baroque works. However, Zoro made light work of him as soon as he saw what he looked like, giving birth to his other nickname, Minority Hunter Zoro. As Zoro continued in his quest to find Mihawk, he ended up in Shell's Town, where Helmeppo and Captain Morgan were in command. When Morgan released his pet wolf in town, Zoro killed it to protect a little girl. This showed us that he's only a pirate hunter to make a living, and he has his own morality he lives by, as he goes against pirates and marines alike. But as strong as he is, Zoro's naivety is on full display, as when Helmeppo told Zoro that if he gets tied to a pole for a month, he wouldn't be considered a criminal anymore and can continue being a pirate hunter. To which he said, okay, bet. Of course, Helmeppo is a lying bozo and they want to execute him in 3 days. However, a pirate comes to the rescue. Luffy, learning of Zoro's fame and the reason for his arrest, wants to recruit him to his crew. So he goes to get Zoro's swords back and saves him from a firing squad. And thus, Zoro showcased the full might of his 3-sword style by defeating Captain Morgan and joined the Straw Hat Pirates. Because the future pirate king, of course, needs to have the world's strongest swordsman as his first mate. It's in the rule book. As Zoro starts sailing with Luffy, they realize that both of them suck at navigating. But luckily, Zoro meets 3 pirates adrift at sea and brings them on board. Although they had the intention to rob the newly formed Straw Hats, as soon as they hear Zoro's name, they piss their pants and start rowing the boat instead. This moment honestly reminds us just how strong this guy Zoro is just at the start of the story. He's already this infamous guy throughout this entire region of the world. Luffy then gets blasted onto Orange Town and is put into a cage by the future pirate king Buggy D. Clown. However, Zoro comes in at the nick of time to save his captain. He tries slicing Buggy, but it has no effect due to the Chop Chop Fruit's power, so Buggy comes in from behind and stabs Zoro. However, Zoro, using his awareness, managed to flip the cannon from being pointed at Luffy and instead onto Buggy and blasted him. This is honestly one of the biggest feats of Zoro's power, as he was able to hold his own against Buggy, a future emperor of the sea, a man respected by Shanks who held his own against Mihawk at Marineford. So basically, Zoro is already top 3 greatest swordsman at this point.
And say shut the f up.
Seriously though, this fight does show us Zoro's ingenuity in a battle where he was focused on the goal. He wasn't trying to beat Buggy, but to make sure that he needs to save his captain. He knew what to prioritize and ran away with Luffy's cage even though he was hurt. However, a crazier feat came right after the moment when Zoro was resting at the mayor's house when the home got demolished by Buggy Balls. Now, any normal person would be blown to bits or crushed to death. Not Zoro though, as he rose from from the debris with no further injuries. He then fought off Kabaji, who was using Zoro's injuries full advantage by striking his wounds. Kabaji even breathed fire directly at Zoro's face, but the pirate hunter held strong. It even became a 1v2 when Buggy sent his arms to hold Zoro in place, but it didn't matter because Zoro used his onigiri attack for the very first time and KO'd the acrobatic. But it wasn't just Zoro's insane swordsmanship that made him an integral part of Luffy's crew. As being the first mate, he was able to steer Luffy as captain and push him into making decisions that would ultimately help achieve his goals as Pirate King. One of these decisions was being a good judge of character, where instantly Zoro clocked that Nami was more than what meets the eye, and he was also very sus of Captain Kuro when they arrived at Syrup Village. However, throughout the early stages of Zoro's time with Luffy, it was clear that he was beyond the levels of the East Blue. This was further showcased in Syrup Village, where Zoro was once again handicapped in a fight. Even with one sword in hand, Zoro refuses help from Usopp and instead tanks Usopp's leading star attack as he wants to fight solo. Luckily though, Navi recovers Zoro's two swords and he easily takes care of the brothers. You know, kinda seeing a pattern here. None of the fighters Zoro has faced so far even poses a little threat to him or a challenge. Well, how did we get there? Mihawk, being one of the warlords of the sea, had just destroyed 50 ships of Dawn Creek, the strongest pirate in the East Blue. Zoro, of course, wanted to challenge him to a duel for not only his dream, but to see the difference between his ability versus the world's strongest. However, Mihawk utterly disrespects our boy by using a tiny knife to fend off all three of Zoro's swords. Zoro even tries his strongest attack, the onigiri, but Mihawk easily stops it and goes for a strike at Zoro's heart. Fortunately, Zoro piqued Mihawk's interest because of his pride and will to not back down. So he asked for Zoro's name, and as a show of respect, he took out his big black sword Yoru. Zoro, as a final attempt, also whips out a secret technique called Sanken Sekai, which also gets destroyed by Mihawk pretty easily. Like, this dude just destroys Zoro's two swords. Like, bro, you can't hang with the greatest swordsman. You don't even know how to use haki. Finally, Mihawk gives him a slash across his chest, leaving a deep scar not only physically, but mentally, by telling Zoro to come and find him once he gets stronger. And to get stronger, you gotta fight better opponents. So, at Arlong Park, Zoro faces off against fishmen, who are supposed to be 10 times stronger than an average human. But he's still hurt, so Usopp ties him up so that he won't try to fight and like worsen his injuries, because he doesn't know how to give up. However, this backfires and causes Zoro to be kidnapped and brought in front of Arlong. Here, he is shocked to learn that Nami has been part of the fishman's crew and was simply there to steal the Straw Hat's treasure. Arlong even adds on to this by stating that Nami would betray her own family if it meant gaining riches, which doesn't sit right with Zoro, as similar to Luffy, he has a very good grasp on the true nature of people. So to prove Arlong wrong and to show Nami that deep down she still cares for the Straw Hats, a tied up Zoro jumps into the water. This man legit staked his entire life on his balls deep analysis of Nami's character. That's how sure he was of her saving him, which she promptly does, but to not arouse suspicion from Arlong, she beats the crap out of Zoro. Lucky for him though, Arlong leaves for Cocoa Village, allowing Nami to cut Zoro's rope so he can escape. However, this is Zoro we're talking about. Even with such a handicap, he remembers that his captain told him to bring Nami back. So he defeated all the fishmen stationed at Arlong Park just to kill some time. As he sits on Arlong's throne, Hachi arrives to give Zoro a lift back to Cocoa Village because bro thinks our boy is a guest of honor. Oh my god. After meeting up with the rest of the crew, Zoro heard Nami's entire backstory from her sister, and without hesitation, he followed Luffy to go and help her by defeating Arlong. During the raid on the park, Zoro displays another strength of his, ascertaining the situation and making the right judgment like a captain while Luffy is stuck underwater. This is shown when Sanji tries to jump instantly to go save Luffy, but Zoro reminds him that fishmen are stronger in water and they could be in trouble, so he starts to face off against Hachi. Unlike his other battles so far, this wasn't a walk in the park, as Hachi used the 6th sword style while Zoro was still struggling with his injuries and fever. However, after borrowing 2 swords, he not only beat the octopus but destroyed his swords in the process, just like Mihawk did to him. Then came the main dish. Since Luffy was still stuck underwater, Zoro teams up with Sanji only to get absolutely decimated by Arlong, but he doesn't give up. While Sanji goes to free Luffy, Zoro keeps Arlong busy. Of course, after being defeated by Mihawk, Zoro is not at full power and isn't able to finish the job on Arlong. But Zoro's will and grit was reinforced by Arlong here. And Arlong went into like literal shock after finding out like the true state of Zoro and the type of injuries he was fighting with. With all the debuffs though, he almost gets killed. If Luffy was even 10 seconds late at being freed, Zoro would have been a goner. After the defeat of Arlong, Zoro then heads into Logtown. Here, he has one objective: get some new swords. However, while on the hunt for them, he has an unlikely encounter. His cousin Kuina shows up right in front of him. Yeah, this totally mindfucks Zoro as the resemblance is uncanny. Now, there is a theory in the community that Kuina's father actually gave her body up to the government due to her proficiency with the sword and her samurai lineage. So the government did what it does best. They experimented and cloned her into a strong marine, likely a future admiral candidate. However, currently, she is just a lieutenant who doesn't realize that Zoro is a pirate, so she helps him pick out some fire swords. First one being the cursed blade Sandai Kitetsu. Any sane swordsman would have ran away from it, but Zoro knows from Shibutsuki Kozuburo that when a sword is cursed, it just means that it's that much better. So he decides to test his luck and puts his fate in his destiny by throwing Sandai Kitetsu up in the air and holding out his arm. Instead of chopping it off, the Kitetsu chooses Zoro as its master, leaving his arm uncut. And luckily, after witnessing Zoro's riz, the shopkeeper gives it to him for free, along with the Ryowazu Mono grade Yubashiri. However, later that night, Tashigi learns who Zoro actually is and tries to engage him in battle, which goes just as you would expect. She gets her ass whooped. Finally, now back with 3 swords, Zoro enters the Grand Line as he reaffirms his dream to become the greatest swordsman. The East Blue had humbled Zoro through his fight with Mihawk, but ultimately, this leads to Luffy fighting Arlong as Zoro was still injured. This often makes people think that Luffy is stronger than Zoro. After all, he is the one who always fights the captain of other crews. But very quickly, upon entering the Grand Line, we get to see just how strong he really is. In Whiskey Peak, the Straw Hats are tricked into getting wasted by a group of Baroque work agents, and Zoro is forced to take on a small army of agents on his own. Obviously, watching him clown on these fodders is a great time, but this also does a lot towards making him feel more powerful. Even if Luffy is the one taking out leaders, Zoro is as strong as 100 of their underlings. But beyond just the flashiness of the fight, this is a perfect example of what Zoro brings to the crew. Yeah, the dude might fall asleep during storms at sea, but he knows the rest of the crew can handle that. On the other hand, let's say if the crew gets a little too rowdy and pass out after a party, that's where Zoro steps up. When the crew gets silly, Zoro is always there to take things seriously. It's no secret that half of the crew is made up of idiots, and because of that, Zoro is there to watch over them and make sure they don't get killed when they're goofing off. If Nami is the brains, then Zoro often ends up being the backbone of the crew in this regard. Of course, this arc doesn't just end with Zoro beating down Baroque works, and we get the 100% logical fight between him and Luffy. Okay, I got a hot take. This is one of the dumbest things that happens in all of One Piece. Like, this makes absolutely 0 sense why Luffy and Zoro are fighting. But honestly, like, this fight actually shows like how much patience Zoro actually has to be able to put up with Luffy's bullshit. Basically, Luffy wakes up, sees that Zoro has beaten up all of these people who fed them and basically wants to kill Zoro. It's super uncharacteristic and just flat out dumb. This is one of the times where Oda did not cook. Why the hell is Luffy trusting these bozo fodder people who just fed him for one night compared to Zoro, who he has been with for the past like month or so, like going through the Grand Line, going through East Blue, beating up Arlong, all these enemies since chapter 2. Now you're listening to these bozos. But honestly, this fight is more or less Luffy and Zoro going full force at each other, and just the chaos of them going at it is enough to take out Miss Valentine and Mr. 5. Mr. 5 is supposed to be the 5th strongest person in all of Baroque works. and they were fatherized while Zoro was fighting Luffy. More importantly though, this shows just how close Luffy and Zoro are in terms of power. Sure, Luffy gets to fight the head honchos, but that isn't because Zoro is weaker by any means. This moment is also a callback to Zoro's original deal with Luffy. If Luffy intends to impede his goals of becoming the strongest, then Zoro will kill him on the spot. So when Luffy tries to fight him here, Zoro doesn't hold back. This is Luffy acting in a way that is unbecoming of a captain, and Zoro is holding his ground in response, and it's a very important part of their dynamic as a whole. Luckily, Nami is able to knock some sense into these two, and once we learn about Vivi and Alabasta, we set sail to the next island, Little Guard. This place is important as it really kicks off the rivalry between Zoro and Sanji. While the actual plot is happening, Zoro and Sanji go out and have a dick measuring contest. Pause. To see who could provide the most for the crew. Right off the bat, obviously this is stupid as hell. On a serious note though, Zoro and Sanji's rivalry actually sheds a lot of light into who Zoro really is. Firstly, he is super competitive and always wants to be the best. Like, he fought Kuina because she was the strongest in the dojo, and currently other than Luffy, Sanji is his main rival on the crew. Of course, that changes when Jinbei joins and Robin joins and Frankie joins, and then Yamato almost joins. Bro would have become 6 Sanji if Yamato joined. What I'm trying to say is that Zoro thrives when being challenged, but realistically, he hasn't had anyone to fit that position since he was a kid. Like, sure, he's chasing after Mihawk, but he isn't really a rival, you know? And like, it's like saying like, I want to be a better League player than Faker, but that doesn't make us equal. Like, that's a one-sided rivalry. Low key though, like, I think I could beat him with Jack's top with Hullbreaker. But anyway, Sanji fills the hole in Zoro's life that Kuina left behind, challenging Zoro to push himself and grow as they both want to prove themselves. But this little squabble becomes less important as Baroque Works returns. This time, things are being led by Mr. 3 and Miss Golden Week, when Zoro is quickly trapped in a giant candle along with Nami and Vivi. On this candle, Zoro has a very different reaction to this situation than the girls do. While they panic as their lungs fill with wax, Zoro, the Alpha Chad Sigma, instead remains calm and stoic. But something that often goes overlooked when discussing this scene is Zoro's effect on Broggy. The giant had been mentally broken after being tricked into defeating Dory, and now he had been pinned down by Mr. 3 with wax swords, so he was more or less content with being killed. But this is where Zoro comes in. He asks the giant if he is able to move and says a giant without hands and feet is more useful than a dead man, adding that he was willing to cut off his own feet to free himself if it meant he could defeat their enemies. Nami, Mr. 3, and Vivi all point out how insane this way of thinking is, but Zoro's conviction and devotion to survival reignites Broggy's will to fight. This shows us that Zoro holds himself to the highest standard possible, and he demands that those around him do the same. While this is unusually demonstrated through Luffy, this is the perfect example of how this can extend beyond him as well. Honestly, this is another reason why most people at first glance consider Zoro to be the real captain.
That's why he's the GOAT! The GOAT!
Speaking of Luffy though, luckily he shows up at the right moment, which means that Zoro doesn't have to cut off his legs. Yay! And then we see an immediate shift in the mood. The second his captain shows up, Zoro smiles and becomes relaxed, and this demonstrates the other side of Zoro. While he wants to protect and provide for his crew, he also has unwavering faith in Luffy. Remember, since Shell's Town, Zoro had committed to the idea of tying his dream to Luffy, so if he's in a life or death situation, there is no one else's hands he'd rather put his fate in. Because if Luffy isn't up to the task, then Zoro has already made a mistake he can't come back from. Like, he put his entire dream on Luffy's back. Of course, we need conflict and drama, so because of Miss Golden Week, that faith is tested. But at the end of the day, things work out as all the Baroque Work agents on the island are defeated, and we can move on to Drum Island, or at least that's what the rest of the crew is up to. When it comes to Zoro, he just kind of swims in the icy water and like walks around the cold for 14 whole episodes. Honestly, it's more or less a Zoro-less arc, meaning we can go straight to Alabasta. This arc is actually when things get serious for Zoro, and he gets tested to his limitation. When the Straw Hats and Smoker are trapped by Crocodile in a sea prism cage, Zoro can't do anything. He just straight up isn't talented enough to slice his way out. If Zoro was more skilled as a swordsman, he could have shattered the cage, but instead, his crew remains trapped. Vivi is in danger and the situation continues to get worse. For a character who is all about being dependable and reliable for their crew, this is the worst case scenario, and you can literally see how frustrated Zoro is on his face in chapter 175. What makes this even more frustrating to him though is that it is Sanji who comes to the rescue. Sure, he's relieved that they are safe, but after just having kicked off their rivalry in Little Garden, now he needed to rely on Sanji. 5 Anji! 5 Anji! That's a knife to the chest right there. But what I like about this instance in Alabasta is that we kind of get a immediate resolution to this character arc of Zoro. Zoro comes face to face with Daz Bones or Mr. One in his big fight of the arc, and Daz has eaten a devil fruit that turns him into a sword person, which essentially means he is made of steel. So far, we've had a few moments that highlight to us that Zoro can't cut steel, like that time when Luffy was trapped in Buggy's cage. So in this fight, Zoro must surpass his limits. This causes him to think back to his former teacher Kyoshiro telling him about swordsmen who can cut nothing and who can also cut anything. The power to protect what you want to protect and cut what you want to cut. Kyoshiro added that a blade that injures all it touches isn't a real sword. This of course complements what Kozuboro had taught Zoro about taming his blades. Mastering swordsmanship means your sword can cut anything, but only when you want it to. You can even extend this to Zoro's character as a whole. He's easily one of the deadliest pirates we know of, but at the same time, he is all about self-control and only strikes those who need to be taken out. In the same way, Luffy is almost like a sword. He has a will of his own and acts recklessly, which is when Zoro steps up to correct this behavior. He focuses on the world around him and says that he can hear the breathing of Dazbone's steel. Through understanding the world around him on a deeper level, he begins to find a path forward and improves his swordsmanship. And by the way, I love the follow-up added on the anime here. Daz asks Zoro if he plans to try and cut diamonds next, and Zoro tells him that it would be a waste. There's no need for him to cut diamonds. That's wasting a slice. Unless he has a reason to cut diamonds, his swords will never need to do that. And of course, that reason is gonna come with the Gorosei, cause Gorosei Venus Jiro, bro, is gonna be made up of diamond. I don't make the rules. This fits his role on the crew, understanding all the moving parts and the flow of things, taking these important actions to get things done. This follows through to the end of the arc when Robin sneaks onto the ship and Zoro is the only member of the Straw Hats to remain hesitant and cautious of her. So with the path forward for Zoro being hinted with not just physical strength, but also his understanding of the world around him, this leads us to Jaya. Jaya itself isn't a huge moment for Zoro. However, it does have the infamous non-fight between Luffy, Zoro, and Bellamy. Bellamy basically drags the Straw Hats' name through the mud, insults them, and pours his entire drink all over them. But just like Shanks did with Higuma, Luffy and Zoro refuse to fight back, ultimately winning the altercation by literally doing nothing. However, one thing Zoro does react to is the moment when Luffy and Zoro meet Blackbeard. While they're moving away from Blackbeard, Zoro and Luffy say this ominous line. It's not he, it's them, giving a hint to us that Zoro's haki perception is at the same level as Luffy, where they can tell that there's something off about Blackbeard. Like, this isn't one guy, this is probably the mythical zone fruit wielder by G.
Oh brother, this guy stinks!
However, this moment of Zoro following Luffy's order with Bellamy, what does it remind you of? Well, we have talked a lot about how Zoro corrects Luffy's path when he acts out, but here we have a reminder that Zoro is Luffy's sword. Like any good blade, he will not cut anything his master doesn't want it to cut. As the Straw Hats descend up to Skypiea, things get to a new godly level, because if Zoro needs to understand and observe the world around him to grow, at the center of that world is the concept of God, creation, and destruction, which leads us to Enel. Once they enter God's Land, Zoro mentions wanting to meet this new god, as he doesn't pray and doesn't believe in God to begin with. So if we aren't looking at a god based on religion for a basis of understanding of the world, like, is Zoro an atheist? Well, no, because in chapter 259, Zoro begins his fight with Brahm. You know this dude, he camps in a corner, shoots his projectiles and zips off with milky dials and just a general bitch-ass fighting style. This puts Zoro in a pretty tough position, and so he begins doing something new to become even stronger. He starts discussing Buddhism's 36 earthly desires, which are expressed through sight, sound, smell, taste, intuition, goodness, badness, neutrality, purity, and impurity. Instead of just understanding the breath of all things, now Zoro is looking to understand how he interacts with this world around him. So with this in mind, this fight allows him to produce a ranged attack for the very first time called the 36-pound Phoenix, leading him to pack this dude up in no time. After dropping down from Skypiea, we then go to fix the Mary in Water 7.
Aren't you forgetting something?
Alright, fine. Long ring, long land. In this arc, Zoro and Sanji finally had the chance to take their love to another level by being paired together in the second game against the Foxy Pirates. Now let's move on. Okay guys, listen, this is a Zoro glazing session, okay? 45 minutes of glizzy overdrive. This arc ruins our agenda. Yeah, Zoro got packed by Aokiji instantly. He lost, but he wasn't a swordsman, so it's fine. Like, his promise with Mihawk is still alive. Bruh, he's a devil fruit user. That's part of his devil fruit power. This is slander. You 5 Anji fans need to get off my script.
Come on, man.
Anyways, in Water 7, Zoro's role as a vice captain is on full display, as all of the drama here starts with the Straw Hats being told that there is nothing the shipwrights can do to fix the Mary. And Luffy makes a grown-up decision for once and chooses to buy a new boat because he can't put his crew at risk by sailing on a sinking ship. But Usopp ain't having none of this, so Zoro makes a stand. Because Usopp had disrespected their captain, left the crew, and even chosen to fight Luffy, Zoro demands that he not be allowed to rejoin until he repents, apologizes, and demonstrates that he is truly sorry for his actions. Otherwise, anyone could just do whatever they wanted and Luffy would have to just be okay with it. It is not something a captain can allow to take lightly. This is probably the pinnacle moment of Zoro demonstrating himself to be the first mate and holding Luffy accountable. He isn't doing this because he hates Usopp, he's demanding that Luffy act like a captain. We've seen so far that Luffy's idea of what pirates are is something that differs hugely from other crews. He doesn't really care about stealing treasure, pillaging, or wreaking havoc. That's not what this is all about, and Zoro knows that and has no problem with it. However, Luffy is still their captain, and even if the understanding of what a pirate is different, there is always going to be a core truth as to what a captain needs to do. This is something he would hold Luffy to even after the events of Water 7. But most of the insane shit Zoro does in Water 7 happens on the sea train because bro is stuck inside a chimney for the entire second half of the arc. More specifically, Zoro has 3 moments that show us that he's on a totally different level than we even thought he was at. Firstly, we gotta talk about Ship Cutter T-Bone, a marine captain who was on the verge of becoming a vice admiral, which he achieves 2 years later. This was a brutal and hard-fought battle that stretched on for hours as Zoro was pushed to his limits.
Stop the cap.
Alright, nah, that doesn't happen. He literally one-shots T-Bone like it was nothing. Honestly, T-Bone being a captain turned vice admiral makes him very similar to Smoker. Yet, Zoro just clears him in a single hit. That in itself was huge, but that's probably the smallest feat here. The sea train is about to crash into 2 train cars that were disconnected on the tracks. All hope is lost. But then, Zoro just casually splits them in half to clear a path forward. Forget T-Bone, this dude just sliced 2 train cars at once. Still not enough for the Sanji riders? Alright, fine. Listen, again, the ship is headed towards disaster as Aqua Laguna is closing in on the train. This is the kind of wave that wipes cities off the map. But Luffy and Zoro just calmly hop on the roof and perform a combo attack that cuts a perfect tunnel all the way through the wave. They split the ocean in half. Where was Sanji? He was in the train. Why wasn't he in the combo attack? Rest my case. This attack actually actually shows us a heightened level of control and power. They aren't just slicing the wave, it's a focused strike that opens up exactly the path they need to proceed onto. At Enies lobby, Zoro is matched up against Kaku as the crew looks for a key to free Robin. With the near omnipotent strength that comes from gaining giraffe powers, that shit's scary, bro. Never mess with a giraffe human. Like, those guys on a different level. Jokes aside though, Kaku actually manages to push Zoro into a bit of a corner. This is the first time we see someone do this other than Daz Bones at this point. Now, what is Zoro's new habit when he's pushed into the corner? Can we get a hint here? Oh yeah, he turns into a Buddhist view of the world to improve, entering the Ashura form for the first time. This has him mimicking the form of the deity Ashur, growing 2 extra heads, 4 more arms, and of course, wielding 9 blades. Interestingly though, like Ashur in Buddhism and Hinduism is actually like known as like the anti-gods. They're kind of like the demons, you know, they're Ashurs. In every fable and story, it's always like the Ashurs who are fighting against the god. And here, Zoro embodies that because Ashurs don't look to others or a higher power for growth, but instead look inwards to both themselves and their connection to the world around them, and that's exactly what Zoro does. This new form could also be considered the ultimate progression of Sandai Kitetsu, the blade that embodies Zoro's desire to become more powerful. This was a sword which lashed out and cut everything in front of it, a problem child that needed to be corrected, as Zoro put it. However, this mentality was also something Zoro had struggled with, which we saw both in the Daz Bones fight and the Brahm fight. The Ashura form though was a moment of release, the synchronization of Zoro and Kitetsu's wrath. Through understanding the world around him, Zoro finally understood that Kitetsu's desire to cut was not something that needed to be rejected, but instead simply needed to be controlled and channeled into something productive. Hence, the 9-sword style Ashura. Remember, Kaku is a member of CP9, the best of the best that the world government has to offer. And not only that, but he's the second strongest in this organization, right after Lucci. For reference, Luffy needed to create second gear just to defeat Blue Eno, a member with a power level of 820, whereas Kaku had a power level of 2200. And sure, the power level thing in One Piece was stupid, so it was abandoned in Mamos immediately, but at least this suggests that he was nearly 3 times stronger than Blueno, which is crazy to think about. As successful as the Enies lobby raid was as a whole, Zoro didn't exactly make it out without losses. That's because while Luffy was fighting Frauducci, Zoro was taking on a Marine Admiral Shu, who used his rust fruit to dissolve Yubashiri. Honestly, it's insanely impressive that like Zoro, like the only time he lost one of his swords was against Mihawk or a Marine Admiral. Like, what the f? Dude, this dude is on a different level. Wait, what's that? Shu wasn't an admiral. He was just some random fodder character who literally does not matter. This kind of doesn't fit our pro Zoro agenda. So, editor, can we remove this section, please? Thank you. I know you guys love Zoro. Editors love Zoro. They'll remove it. With this insane Ashura power-up and a sword missing, Zoro heads into Thriller Bark, where he must come face to face with his ancestor, the greatest samurai ever, Shimotsuki Ryuma. At this time, we obviously didn't know just how connected these two were, but coming across this legendary dragon-slaying swordsman is Zoro's next real test. Mihawk had shown him what the pinnacle of swordsmanship could be. Daz Bones and Kaku had pushed him beyond his limits, and now Ryuma was putting this growth to the test. What's unique about this fight though is that there are no gimmicks. Even Santoryu isn't used. It is purely a demonstration of swordplay at its foundation. But after slaying Ryuma, Zoro gets a reward, the Black Blade Sushui. Of course, this isn't the only challenge that Zoro faces in Thriller Bark, as after Moria is finally defeated, the crew is met by Bartholomew Kuma. With Luffy incapacitated and the rest of the crew totally exhausted, Kuma easily takes everyone out, with the exception of Zoro and Sanji. It's no wonder everyone loves this moment, right? You guys know what's coming up. All hope is lost. Kuma is ready to take Luffy's head, but then Zoro offers his own life instead, saying that he isn't notorious yet, but Kuma should consider him the man who will become the greatest swordsman in the world. so that should be a fair trade. But another display of Zoro's loyalty and friendship to the crew is showcased here when Sanji pops up and basically tries to steal Zoro's thunder, saying he wants Kuma to take his life instead of Zoro's. It's a really powerful moment, as for 250 chapters now, 2/3 of the story, all these two have done is berate each other and butt heads. Now though, Sanji is stepping up and showing just how much respect he actually has for Zoro, something that is clearly mutual, as Zoro knocks him out to ensure no one else has to suffer. And so Kuma removes Luffy's pain in a giant bubble and allows Zoro to take it all on himself. This is Zoro in his purest form, stoic and dependable, willing to suffer anything for the ones he cares about. 800 chapters later, we learn that the pain Zoro took even shocked Kuma, as Zoro wasn't even the sturdy buccaneer race. He should have died, but his unwavering will and monstrous defense allowed Zoro to persevere even the limits of DNA. To Zoro, it doesn't matter if he has to go through absolute hell. So long as he can protect his friends, then he will conquer the hell and act like nothing happened, because it can always be worse. That idea is fleshed out even further as we move on to Sabaody Archipelago, where Oda asks, okay, but what if everyone does lose each other? What would happen then? Everything really kicks off when Luffy punches Saint Acoustic in the rescue effort for Kami, and the entire force of the Marines is brought down on the Straw Hats, including Kizaru and a small army of pacifistas. For reference, it takes a combined effort of Sanji's Diablo Jambe, Luffy's third gear, and Zoro's Ashura form to take down one pacifista after wearing it down over a very long fight. These are insurmountable obstacles that show us just how unprepared the Straw Hats are in comparison to what's the new world has to offer. We've seen the Straw Hats fight warlords, CP9, even the false god Enel, but at the end of the day, they are still terribly weak. Luckily, the real Kuma shows up and in an attempt to save the Straw Hats, sends them all over the world. And honestly, like Kuma showing up to protect Luffy like this, I think Zoro tanking nothing happened, it has a lot to do with it, because that showed Kuma that this guy Luffy, maybe he is Nika, maybe he will bring the drums of liberation to the entire world, because if people are wanting to die for Luffy, then maybe I should save him. Honestly, Kuma coming to save them is a lot to do with Zoro as well here. So Kuma claps Zoro and he's sent to Mihawk's island to get some ghost girlisy.
Sensational.
After receiving the 3D 2-eye message from Luffy, Zoro asks Mihawk to become his trainer so that he could defeat him one day. Though Mihawk originally laughed at the absurdity of the idea of training someone to beat him, he eventually accepts after hearing that Zoro had defeated the human drills and he had proven that he had some level of talent. Remember, these human drills, they watched Mihawk train day and night, so these guys are using the swordsmanship that Mihawk uses, and Zoro was able to defeat all of them. Can Sanji do that?
No.
2 years later, now at the age of 21, Zoro is revealed to have a scar running down his left eye and seems to be unable to open it, showing the brutal training he had with Mihawk. After returning to Sabaody Archipelago, we finally see Zoro's insane power-up, as he slices an entire pirate ship in half after accidentally sleeping on it as it sets off for the New World. This is mirroring Mihawk's cutting of Don Krieg's ship at the Baratier and showing us that Zoro is making progress towards his ultimate goal. Zoro's strength is further highlighted after he reunites with Luffy and Sanji as he one-shots a pacifista. This contrasts Zoro's pre-times capabilities, where the entire Straw Hat crew struggled against these machines. But with this, Zoro's and the Straw Hats' journey to the New World finally starts as they reach Fishman Island. For once, Zoro actually gets to take a swing at the big bad of the series as he faced off against Hody Jones underwater. Yes, a human fought a fishman underwater. And not only did Zoro survive this fight, but he even lands a devastating strike on Hody using one sword style. This is also a reference back to Arlong Park, where Zoro warned Sanji against fighting fishmen underwater, whereas now, that's light work. Zoro later fought against Hyozo, the self-proclaimed strong strongest swordsman in Fishman Island who was pumped up with energy steroids, but completely decimated him with absolutely no effort. My man even called him a warm-up before breaking his swords. Later, when the Straw Hats reach Punk Hazard, Zoro ends up facing off against a real dragon, and like Zoro's ancestor Ryuma, he slices off the dragon's head with a single blow. During this time, another character-defining moment for Zoro happens, where we learn his opinion on gender equality. Seriously though, this goes back to his relationship with Kuina, where he only sees the person in front of him as an opponent. Only skill matters, so at that moment, Monet wasn't a woman but prey. This stomping of Monet actually highlights Zoro's insane controls with his attacks, as he was able to hold back his armament haki just enough to not kill her. Yup, Zoro is just that guy. He is him. As the Straw Hats form their alliance with the Heart Pirates and take Caesar captive, they make their way to Dressrosa. Zoro hadn't really been challenged too much in the New World so far, but that all changes here as he showcases his power as the future #1 swordsman against a Navy Admiral Fujitora. During their clash, Fujitora sends Zoro crashing down through the ground using his gravity powers, with Zoro saying that this opponent was the strongest he had ever fought since Mihawk. But Zoro channels his inner self and withstands this pressure, even earning respect from the Admiral. However, we don't get to see this fight progress any further because of plot. Yeah, no, cheers for that, Oda. Definitely didn't want to see that one play out. But Zoro does face off against one of Doflamingo's top 3 officers, Pika, who had eaten the Ishi no Mi. This ability allowed him to assimilate into any stone material he came into contact with, also letting him manipulate it. Pika was also a swordsman in his own right, using a giant katana against the Dressrosa invaders, so of course there was only really one opponent for him, Zoro. His entire fight against Pika showcases the power level Zoro had reached post-time skip, as he fought them with relative ease. It was just Pika's devil fruit really that caused a nuisance to him. Moreover, Zoro had grown to such a level that he could slice Pika's giant stone body in half from the waist. After Doflamingo was taken down, the Straw Hats formed their grand fleet and made their way to Zou. Zoro's new bounty went up to 320 million berries, though this happiness would be cut short as Sanji's bounty went slightly higher than his after the events of Whole Cake Island. The Ninja Pirate Mink Samurai Alliance split up in Zou, where Zoro's part of the group headed to Wano whilst the rest went searching for Sanji in Whole Cake Island. I mean, come on, Oda had to do it. Whole Cake Island would have ended in like 5 chapters if Zoro went along with Luffy. But Zoro's entire theme and glow-up takes place in his next destination. That is the land of Wano. Zoro's connection to the Shimatsuki is brought up time and time again in Wano, from his relationship with Ryuma and even the resemblance to his grand uncle Ushimaru. This blood bond, though not intended, was brought out by Zoro's anger towards the people of Ebisu. However, Zoro's anger turns to rage when he learns the truth of the Smile Fruit. But the highlight of this tragic moment is Zoro strengthening his bond with his future wife Hiyori and adoptive cousin Toko after saving the latter from Orochi. His relationship with Hiyori is further lamented as she convinces Zoro to let go of his ancestor's black blade Shisui and in turn offers herself to him along with her father's own sword Enma, which was passed down to her. Now of course Zoro agrees, as this sword is said to be one of only 2 swords to ever wound Kaido, the other being Amano Habakiri. When Zoro receives Enma, it immediately sucks him dry of haki. Though Zoro was able to win the haki tug of war against Enma, he still had much to learn when taming Odin's sword. His bond with Enma would soon get tested during the raid on Onigashima, where Zoro had proved himself the MVP multiple times. Not only did he save Luffy on many occasions, he was also able to use Kinemon's Foxfire style and cut down Kaido's Dragon Breath in half. Kaido was even forced to dodge an attack from Zoro's Enma as he would not be able to tank it. That moment of sheer instinct from Kaido was due to the fact that Zoro's presence through Enma reminded him of Odin. But one of the most impressive feats would follow through, as the Emperors charged up their haki to attack the Alliance. Hakai was so powerful that all Luffy, Law, Kid and Killer could do was watch in despair, but not Zoro. My man defends the attack with his 3 swords and deflects it away. This feat puts Zoro at the top of the pedestal, as not only did he defend an attack against 2 powerful Yonkos, he did it when other powerful characters stood helpless. But it does not end here. As Kaido is about to finish Luffy off after knocking him out for the 100th time, the real protagonist of One Piece intervened. Proving his loyalty once again to his captain, Zoro activates his Ashura form, imbued with his Conqueror's Haki for the first time, and attacks Kaido, wounding him. Once again, this shows the similarities between Zoro and Odin, who both used more than one sword styles along with Enma, and are also the only two people to wound Kaido at the time.
Is he actually not just the protagonist of One Piece?
But Zoro's actual test of skill and endurance comes against Kaido's right-hand man, King. King is the last of the Lunarians, a powerful race that existed during the Void Century. Meanwhile, Zoro, he's got protagonist plot armor. Listen, alright, if you want him to be the real protagonist, he's gotta have the plot armor to match. Though Zoro was able to go toe-to-toe against King, he was immediately nerfed due to the quarrel between him and Enma. The sword had not completely chosen Zoro, but was willing to test him. Zoro's respect for Odin grew much more during this time, as Odin was able to feed Enma with enough haki to satisfy it, which Zoro found difficult to do. He realized that it was his strength and will that was not on par to Enma's standard. Noticing that Enma was starting to test him, he decided to step it up a notch, activating his Conqueror's Haki again and knocking out the NPC beast pirates. Through his advanced armament and Conqueror's Haki, Zoro was able to satisfy Enma's thirst, succeeding in its test and defeating King in a final attack. This move pushed Zoro even further towards becoming the King of Hell itself. Just as Asura was the manifestation of Zoro and Kitetsu's reunion, the King of Hell form comes from an understanding of Enma. Due to repercussions of the battle and the drugs he was taking, Zoro was down for the count until the Grim Reaper showed itself to him. For those who have watched our Zoro Bankai video will know the Grim Reaper is a bridge to Zoro's second Bankai. The first being Ashura through Sendai Kitetsu, and the second being the King of Hell through the Grim Reaper, that is Enma. Becoming the King of Hell contrasts Zoro's childhood statement of becoming strong enough that his name would be known throughout the heavens. So Zoro still has one more Bankai up his sleeve through Wado Ichimonji and the will of Kuina, which he will inevitably activate during his final clash against the strongest swordsman in the world, Dracul Mihawk. In turn, completing his promise to Kuina, making Zoro the true strongest swordsman. Now, if you enjoyed this video, click this one on your screen right now.